morning. It's a joy of mine to share with you today's message for over the next few minutes. And I hadn't introduced myself. If someone is new, my name is Rigo Kabucho, and I serve as lead pastor for Journey ICC. And it's an honor to journey together as we continue to grow in God's presence. Today I'm delighted to introduce the conversation that we'll be having, a new one over the next few minutes. And it's a conversation through the book, the Old Testament book of Ruth. I'm excited about it. A short while ago, when Joey and I met to discuss the conversation we'll have this season, we started off to go through a book of the Bible, and the book that was top of our minds was Nehemiah. And so we started, we grappled, but for some reason, Nehemiah wasn't quite working. And so we started brainstorming other books. Next, we went to Esther, looked at possibilities, and just like Nehemiah, it wasn't working. And then we just mentioned, what about Ruth? And strangely, we just thought, we have ideas about Ruth and they look like good ideas. Let's do Ruth. After all, we've ruled out many books. And then we asked ourselves, how shall we approach it? And we were like, honestly, none of us has been reading Ruth lately. So let's end the meeting, take some time to read through the book of Ruth, and then we'll come together and just see what we found. And then we had our next conversation after that. It was lit. We both had spent some time in the book of Ruth. And on my part, I was like, this is amazing. This is amazing as I was going through it. I can't believe it. This is such a cool story. Unbeknownst to me, that's the same thing that Joey was going through. So when we met, it was just like, ideas and all these themes, and we were like, yes. Somebody would say that we knew exactly the perfect book for the moment, and we are those people who look at the world around us and just pick the perfect book for the moment, but really, it is just a story that came alive for us. And I share that background because I hope over the next few weeks as we go through Ruth, you'll discover what a rich story it is. Just a good story in the sense of what makes a good story, but a story so profound that it begins to form and shape your life. One biblical scholar, reflecting about the book of Ruth, said, as a piece of literature, it is almost perfect. Yet as a revelation from God, it is equally impressive. The German poet Goethe called it the loveliest complete work on a small scale ever written. Alexander Schroeder, a literary critic, said that no poet in the world has written a more beautiful story. Is that what you feel when you read Ruth? You just read it as another book of the Bible, yeah? But people have been grappling with it. One more, an eminent archaeologist, W.F. Albright, wrote, the delicacy of the story of Ruth remains unsurpassed anywhere. Ruth's loyalty to her mother-in-law, the scene between her and Boaz in chapter 3, and the final episode with Naomi, chapter 4, 14 to 17, are gems of world literature. So I'm excited as we take a deep dive into this remarkable story over the next few weeks. And as we do so, I invite you to read the book. Read it several times. In fact, if you discover I'm so boring, you'll finish before I finish speaking. It's just a short book, 4 chapters, 85 verses, right? But don't do it right now. So just encourage me. But, after this, read the book of Ruth and read it slowly several times. See what you will pick for yourselves. The things we share, perhaps they moved me, but may they be a guide. May they shape you. Prayerfully allow it to form your life. So that's the invitation as we go through Ruth. Just read it, see what stands out for you, how it shapes you, grapple with it, and hopefully it becomes something that guides you. So let us begin with a few introductory remarks into the book of Ruth. as we're going to see shortly, we are told this, the events of the story take place in the days when judges ruled Israel. When was that? Soon after, the Israelites leave Egypt under the leadership of Moses, wander in the wilderness for 40 years. Moses dies and Joshua takes over when they're about to reach their destination, and Joshua leads them into Canaan. And not only leads them, but he leads them into occupying and settling the land. And after Joshua dies, they adopt this system of leadership where they had judges popping up in different areas and in different times and guiding people through complex seasons of lives. And we're told that the events of the story of Ruth take place when judges ruled Israel. So that is significant because it gives us a historical context. People try to date when that might happen, and the most accurate estimations are 1000 BCE, and we are about 22,000, CE, current era, and so it's about 3,000 years ago. Another thing about that time when judges ruled Israel, something very interesting. Once in a while, we like to pick a book of the Bible to do a series. Perhaps I will have done all the books before I can consider Judges. Now, Judges is a complex book. It is difficult. If you've dared to read it, it breaks your heart, it makes you angry, it confuses you, and you give up. Because Judges is like the day's headlines in modern times. It maybe just captures what was wrong about that time. So it is one bad story after one bad story. And so when you read the book of Judges, you come up, you conclude, you see how broken that time was, how depraved the people were. The amount of violence is like watching a mafia series, or something so crazy today's time. So it was a time of anarchy. It was chaotic in the history of Israel. It was just a tough time. In fact, one verse in the book of Judges sums up that era very well. Judges 17 verse 6. In those days, there was no king in Israel. All the people did what was right in their own eyes. Yeah, and that sums it up. It was just a crazy, difficult time. Yet even that time, one or two individuals would rise up and heroically do the right thing and guide the nation. Yeah, there was a lot of wars and battles. Most of those leaders, even those ones who were appointed by God, did things you'd cringe. Yet the book of Ruth emerges out of such a time. They say, historically, long time ago, it was an addendum to the book of Judges. But eventually they thought this story is worth a book in itself, and they moved it around. It's a book about ordinary people and the triumph of goodness over evil, especially at a time when the context they lived in was just so broken and depraved. And even with saying that, you begin to see how it can shape you. Ordinary people seeking to do good things. Yeah. Other judges were very heroic. They fought. Others were just strong, like Samson. But Ruth is a non-violent portrayal of what it looks like. Yeah, in ordinary times. And when it says ordinary people, that's where I like, because I find myself to be very ordinary. No superhero gifts, nothing. And maybe you and I. So we should begin liking the story from that time. Another thing is that the book of Ruth is the only one of two books in the Bible named after a woman. Yeah? They're named after a woman. And the other one is Esther. The two differences between them is that Ruth is a young Gentile woman who is brought to live among the Hebrews and married a Hebrew husband in the line of royal David. Yeah, Ruth comes from outside and finds herself in the center of things. Esther, a young Hebrew woman who is brought to live among the Gentiles and marries a Gentile husband on the throne to a great empire. Yeah? Esther moves from the center of things to the margin of things, but all show how God moves and works in people. The book of Ruth is a story of family, commitment, caring for one another. How do you care for the marginalized and vulnerable? It is about loving relationships as well as love and care for the vulnerable in society. As we're going to go along, we're going to grapple with things like, what does economic justice even mean? It is a story also, a very strong theme that runs into it, and where we'll begin. It's a story about loss and beginning again. It is definitely a story that has a lot to tell us in our time today. There's a storyteller that I love. He likes to tell ancient stories and myths, and I find them very interesting. And his name is Martin Shaw. He's a weird Brit. One of the things that he says that I love is that the stories we need in our time arrived precisely on time 5,000 years ago. I have held on to that. It has made me go to old stories like food I really need. The stories we need most in our time arrived precisely on time 5,000 years ago. And I would say the same about the story of Ruth. We need the story of Ruth. It is so much in time, and it has been in time for 3,000 years. Yeah. So we will go through the story in stages. We're not going to rush. We wanted to cover chapter 1, 2, 3, 4, get done. But you sit with chapter 1 and you're like, you'll do it a very big injustice if you just go rush through it. So we will go through it in stages, and we will draw out what we need for this moment, for our lives in God. Yeah, because we live at an era of great advancements in everything: science, psychology, philosophy. You know, there's a lot out there telling us how to live, but there's a part of us. There's a part of us that is beyond anecdotes, and it's all about story. You know, if you're gonna live into soulfulness, maybe the soul craves story. That's how you find your way to soulfulness in life. And so we're gonna let this story shape us. And here's the thing about stories. There's so many stories, but there are particular stories that are meant to shape our lives with God and in God in our world today. And so that's what we are looking at. What if we look at the story of Ruth and see how it continues to shape us now for life in God and with God in our world in this moment? So I hope you find yourself in there and you pick something. So for today, we begin chapter 1. It is a very rich chapter, but I want to start us off with one of the key themes in that chapter: loss and suffering. If I was to do a movie about the book of Ruth, I would begin it in chapter 1, verse 19 to 21. Let's begin that movie right together. Chapter 1, verse 19 to 21. So the two of them went on until they came to Bethlehem. When they came to Bethlehem, the whole town was stirred because of them. And the women said, "Is this Naomi?" She said to them, "Call me no longer Naomi. Call me Mara. For the Almighty God has dealt bitterly with me. I went away full, but the Lord has brought me back empty. Why call me Naomi when the Lord has dealt harshly with me and the Almighty has brought calamity upon me? Don't call me Naomi, which means pleasant. Call me Mara, which means bitter." I'll begin the story there. And I'll begin to grapple what has gone into the lives of this human that she is willing to let go of the name pleasant and hold on to the name bitter. And then I would take us back to Ruth chapter 1 from verse 1 to 6. And I would inscribe in the screen 10 years earlier, right? And we'd see what happened that led to that. Ruth chapter 1, verse 1 to 6. In the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land, and a certain man of Bethlehem in Judah went to live in the country of Moab, he and his wife and 2 sons. The name of the man was Elimelech, and the name of his wife Naomi. And the names of his 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion. They were Ephrathites from Bethlehem in Judah. They went into the country of Moab and remained there. But Elimelech, the husband of Naomi, died, and she was left with her 2 sons. These took Moabite wives. The name of one was Orpah, and the name of the other, Ruth. When they had lived there for about 10 years, both Mahlon and Chilion also died, so that the woman was left without her 2 sons and her husband. Then she started to return with her daughters-in-law from the country of Moab, for she had heard in the country of Moab that the Lord had considered his people and given them food. 10 years before, that's what happened. So I had a map. Some maybe you can project a map. I had a map that showed us the geographical relationship. And so they used to live in Bethlehem. You can see Bethlehem there. And then they traveled all the way during famine to Moab and lived there. And tragedy happened there. And then they went back. So that's the geographical context where the story starts. You know, the opening of the story does not even try to be pleasant. You know, it's not even attempting to say once upon a time. It just dives into the depths of tragedy without warning. Yeah? Within 5 verses, we see what was most important to Naomi, stripped and wiped out. If you are Naomi, why would you want to hold on to the name pleasant after all that had just happened? And so the way the book opens, it opens in a very odd way, and we are in odd territory. And I thought, whenever I've read Ruth, I go quickly to the punchlines, to the comforting words. But today, I don't want us to rush through that odd beginning. In fact, that is where we're going to be today. Odd territory. The story does not even attempt to be neat, to begin in a neat way. It is heavy and messy from the very word go. And because it begins this way, I do not want us to rush past the heavy and messy and painful part of the story, but stay there, stay with it, feel that discomfort a little bit, and see what it may tell us today. One of the constant realities of being human and living in this world is that there will be suffering. No matter how hard you try, there will be suffering. Sometimes it may be due to the brokenness of other people and just how they set up an environment that harms us. Sometimes our dreams die and collapse. Sometimes our bodies become ill. Jobs end. Loved ones pass along. Famine hits. Economies struggle like this moment. It's almost like it's impossible to go through life without tasting suffering. And I think as the story opens, it just tells us that. And when we suffer, one of the questions we ask is, why? Why me? Why us? Why this, God? And you can see clearly how Naomi is asking those questions. Don't call me Naomi, call me Mara, because God has dealt a bad one to me. Why God? Why did I have to be the one? Why my family? You see, everyone wants the best for their lives. Everyone wants the best for their families. And I believe when Elimelech and Naomi discussed, let's make that move. You know, they were seeking the best. But unfortunately, when they went there, you know, they say Bethlehem means house of bread. They went to a land of Moab, and Moab was just a land that was constant enmity with the people of Israel, but they just wanted to preserve their lives, but little did they know the loss and tragedy that awaits them. And nobody plans for loss, tragedy, or suffering. We don't plan. We don't say, one of my goals in the next 2 years is that I'll have gone through 3 major sufferings and 5 major triumphs. We don't do that. We plan our lives, but those ones just show up. Just show up. It makes you wonder, what is up with life? Who brings these things? That's the other question. Where is God when all these things are happening? And it's painful. So Naomi says, God, you have dealt bitterly with me. Chapter 1 is about a family encountering the worst of tragedies anyone can ever name, the loss of their loved ones. And in the ancient days, a widow was one of the most destitute people you could ever meet. They had no family, they had no covering, they had no property, they were on. And that's why scripture over and over again talks about the widow and the orphan and attempts to make the Israelites to be very conscious about this, because everyone else can be taken care of, but these ones, you come together, and as a law of God, you care and you mind them, the most vulnerable. So here are a few insights we glean from that story of suffering. First, it is so good that the story does not trivialize suffering. Because when you find yourself in a moment of suffering and grappling and having to be the one who's carrying these heavy questions, it is real, it is difficult, and it not just will come and tell you, you know what, take courage, it will all go away. That is good, but that is not what chapter 1 of Ruth is showing us. Chapter 1 of Ruth is showing us a woman who's really feeling it, who's really feeling it, and she goes home to her country. She has been missed. She has been gone for a long time. And the townspeople come to meet her, and they're asking, is this Naomi? You know, they want to create some sort of parade. And Naomi says, hush, don't even call me Naomi. Call me Mara. I've tried to grapple with that, and I've tried to see Naomi as one who is really, really struggling and holding on to suffering more than is able, more than is necessary. But over the last few days, as I reflected upon this, I realized there's something else important that is happening in this one chapter. And as the camera zooms into Naomi and how she's grappling with that, it doesn't trivialize suffering, but presents it in all its anguish and discomfort and gives it adequate space. Is Naomi wrong for feeling the pain of the loss too much? Because you sense it. She's feeling it too much and she's carrying it too long. Sometimes we may be tempted that it's wrong, but I don't think so. Some commentaries have even explored and come up with titles, how Naomi chose bitterness over faith. And while that might be so, I must also comment, that on average, we are a society that wants to explain suffering away and wants it to pass really quick. We don't even have language, that says, I'm in a bad place. Because that's what Naomi is saying. Don't come here celebrating and giving me a homecoming. I'm in a bad place. In fact, bitter. Bitter is the word. I am not advocating that we linger in suffering and never ever grow from that. But what I'm inviting us to is to consider this, that we do not deny suffering. Hi, Caleb. Hi. Give me a high five. And then go to Mama. She's waiting for you. Give me something. Yes, back there. Yeah. It's okay. I can train the next generation of pastors. You can. He's okay. He's okay. He's not. Yeah. So, yeah. Rather than lingering in suffering for too long, what we're being invited to hear is a posture of not denying the suffering. It is healthy and human to actually acknowledge that this failure, this loss, this difficult moment is actually so very disappointing, and I'm frustrated, and it's heartbreaking. And allow the experiences to move through us, for a moment till they move out. Once we are hit with those difficult moments, one of the things we want to do is to push them out and deny them. But we are being invited from this story. Once you're hit with difficult moments, it is human to just say, this is extremely hard. This is not a colorful moment. This that I'm going through is a difficult moment. And actually right now, I feel like I have a problem with God. Why have you dealt bitterly with me? Naomi is pointing that way for us. It is not a comfortable thing, but a brave and courageous thing to tell the people who haven't seen you for so long, who are hugging you, who are saying, welcome back. It is actually a brave and courageous thing to look them and tell them, I do not come in rejoicing, but I am in grief and bitterness right now. The loss I have encountered is too much to even comprehend. Yeah? We need those kind of words. When I encounter a good story, especially a work of fiction, I love to pay attention to how it opens. And I've been trying to take note. What would be my favorite opening of any story? And one of them that I've seen to be really good was actually written 700 years ago. And it's called Dante's Inferno. You know, Dante's Divine Comedy, the Inferno. So the comedy is actually 3 big volumes of work. There's Inferno, there's Purgatory, and there's Paradise. But then Inferno is the one that begins. So this is how it opens. Midway along the journey of our life, I woke up to find myself in some dark woods, for I had wandered off from the straight path. How hard it is to tell what it was like. The wood of wilderness, savage and stubborn. The thought of it brings back all my old fears. A bitter place, death could scarce be bitterer. But if I will show the good that came of it, I must talk about things other than the good. It opens like that and then invites you to an adventure. And as I was looking at it, I thought, what a good way to capture those moments when we wake up in the middle of a dark wood, so dark that we can't even make out things. Yeah? We all have those seasons. Now, one of the ways is to say, this is not where I should be, and it is going to pass by so quickly. But it puts us in a posture of contesting and fighting it off. But to say, this is actually a dark wood, help me. It allows us to accept the moment as it is and then begin to move forward. The story of Ruth is about that. Yeah? It doesn't end. Actually, 1 to 6 shows the tragedy that happens. The rest of the book is about how they live on beyond the loss. It is not about getting stuck, but it is about being honest. So the first insight we draw from this encounter is an acceptance, a way of admitting what is happening. We must be brave enough to allow and say when things are difficult, to say when I'm in a dark wood. We also must be brave to be with each other in that discomfort. We live in a society that does not know. Many examples have been said how we usually greet each other and expect an auto reply. Hi, how are you? Fine. And then when someone says something that is contrary to the auto reply, hey, how are you? I'm actually bad. We are stunned. We do not know how to go. So we have to be brave to say when things are not right, and brave enough to be with each other in that discomfort. Acknowledging the pain of loss and suffering is not a lack of faith, but an opportunity to choose faith and trust in the midst of the devastation. It is not that you have given up on faith when you say, things right now, that is actually a bad moment. It does not mean you've lost your faith. It actually puts you in a better place to choose faith and trust in the midst of it. Sometimes the truth of the experience reveals to us the action that we might need to take. Yeah? So, maybe now, maybe sometimes back, when did you wake up along the journey of your life and found yourself in a dark wood, in the dark woods? Did you ever acknowledge that? Or did you just, try to circumspect it? Or currently, is there something that could be like a dark woods you just woke up and you've been trying to repaint it as best as you can? The story of Naomi in chapter 1 says, imagine it's okay to say this moment is not good and you'll not be losing your faith. In fact, you'll be in a better position to choose faith and trust in the midst of it. The second thing we glean, and actually the book of Ruth has a lot of gleaning, as we're going to see, from this story of suffering, is as much as Naomi was in so much pain, Naomi was not alone. It seems that initially the three of them, Naomi, Orpah, and Ruth, stuck together through that unimaginable loss. And eventually when Orpah, as we're going to see, turns back, Ruth chooses to be with Naomi, to walk with her all the way through. So the one thing that doesn't happen is that Naomi is not alone through it all. She is with loving, caring company. As we have said a moment ago, we cannot predict or even explain the losses and sufferings we will encounter in life. But what this tells us is that we can cultivate supportive relationships in our lives. Yeah? We can awaken our care, our concern, and our commitment for one another. It's hard to say what will hit you in 5 years. But right now, you can awaken your kindness, your concern, your care, your commitment to one another. You can just continue looking at each other and investing in that. Not so that when suffering comes, you'll have something, but because it's even in good times, it helps us. I believe Naomi pulled through, most importantly, because of the care and companionship of Ruth, who had also shared in the loss. Naomi had lost 3, Ruth had lost her beloved husband. As we journey through life, we face many losses. That we always do. Yeah? But one of those things the book of Ruth is calling us over and over again to is that in the midst of difficulty, in the midst of famine, in the midst of an economy that makes your salary go much shorter than it used to go, and you wonder, what will I do, right? In the midst of fuel crisis, I was reading on the news how it's so interesting. All the oil companies are making double-digit profits. Some are doubling, some are tripling in the world. Yeah? And they're saying in November, the body that regulates oil production is going to cut 20 million barrels. And so we were told, brace for even tougher times. So you were like, what's going on there, you may not control all those things, but we can. The book of Ruth calls us to one thing, It's easy in such moments to get into panic, to mind yourself only, to be rough and tough, to live by the mantra of survival for the fittest. Yeah? But the book of Ruth kind of calls us to a new motto: survival for the kindest. And they say that's the only thing that has kept humanity through millennia: survival for the kindest. So awaken that, cultivate that. No matter how hard times get, cultivate your own kind spirit and caring spirit. The book of Ruth shows and demonstrates what love is without saying love. Right? It doesn't say, and Ruth loved her mother very much. It just shows. You know, they say in movie making, show, don't tell, right? That's what it does. It shows us love. And not only Naomi and Ruth, but even as they continue and we meet Boaz, it shows us that love, without saying the word love, in a world full of immense struggles and sufferings and losses, like right now, we have all lost something through the pandemic. And we thought the pandemic will be over, but pandemic left and hard economic times checked in. You know, and so many, it's a season marked by loss, but in such moments, we can have a greater and greater reserve of kindness and love and care. That's the second thing I notice. So we may not do much to alleviate the suffering and the loss in the world today, but whatever we do, be kind, be caring. This is a new power, and this will be the new heroism that we see in the book of Ruth. I came across a beautiful painting that I want you to just have a look. It's called Whithersoever Thou Goest. It picks from the King James, Ruth talking to Naomi and saying, wherever you go, I shall go. Such a even beautifully titled, Whithersoever Thou Goest. And I think that is what Ruth is calling us to. You know, as you look at each other, the people in your circle, the people beyond your circle, whithersoever thou goest, see that gaze of Ruth upon her elderly mom. And I think the artistic impression is really cool, though scholars say perhaps Naomi was in her early 50s, late 40s, and Ruth was maybe her late 20s. She's more older, but that's it. One picture, 1,000 words. I almost want to end there, but let me offer you a third insight that we glean. Where is God in the picture as Naomi is going through this? I think God always sustains us through it all, even in unseen and unexpected ways. And some ways we do not recognize, because when we are suffering and it's hard, we'd want the suffering to pass away quickly. But sometimes God just sustains and provides us through it. And that is what happened to Naomi. God allowed Naomi to weather through the difficult loss by having some incredibly caring daughters-in-law in her life. I don't know whether she thought about it that way. She would have loved to have her family intact. But when the tragedy happens, she found that she had incredibly loving daughters-in-law. And that was God's provision and sustenance. And as Naomi, as we'll see later on, trying to convince them to go back to their homes, she's just concerned. She wants them to have a fresh start in life, to make a life for themselves. But Ruth chooses another option and goes with Naomi. And in the end, we discover that God allowed Ruth to find a fresh start, a new husband, in the midst of caring and tending to her mother-in-law. So God is always present, carrying us through. We may not see it in moments of suffering because it happens in the ways we least expect. This story shows us that suffering and loss and devastation, they occur and leave us in a bad state. Sometimes, never to go back to what was lost. Like for Naomi, never to have gotten back her husband and her 2 sons. But we also see God's power in the present moment, weaving a new story in the midst of an old one. Weaving a new story in the midst of an old one. Naomi would have really loved her family, but we see her making her way back to Bethlehem, Judah. We see her describing the immense suffering and bitter state she's in. And when you read the rest of the book, the 2 women end up in a fulfilling new chapter of their life stories, despite the loss of their cherished ones. And only God does that. We do not rewrite it. God writes it for us in unseen ways. So all this invites us to do one thing in the midst of our suffering, to respond in more trust than despair. In these days and times, we have seen people who have ended up being completely broken and devastated and finished by suffering. We're being invited to respond in trust more than despair, however much we lose. We trust through the pain and devastation. Like we have said, acknowledge all that is happening and also acknowledge that God is still there and we can depend on Him as we continue each new day. Both of those two things can be true at the same time. It is really bad and God is still here. And sometimes the reason why we think God is not there is because we think God cannot be so present when it is so bad. But those two things can be true at the same time. God is writing a new story with our ruins and devastations. And that's why we should not be ashamed of them. We should not deny them. We should instead peer them, trust into them trustingly, and tell God, how are you present here? How can you write a new story in the midst of this? The former CFO of Facebook, Sheryl Sandberg, talks about her own life journey. Life seemed to be ideal. She had a great book, a great job, a best-selling book, a loving family. But in the spring of 2015, her husband was felled by a cardiac condition while the couple was vacationing in Mexico. And life just changed, just like Naomi. Struggling to regain her footing after his death, she reached out to her friend Adam Grant, who's pictured with her there, a Wharton professor and author, to explore what research tells about resilience. That led to their collaboration on a new book called Option B, Facing Adversity, Building Resilience, and Finding Joy. I think the book of Ruth could be retitled the same way. One of the things they discuss in the book is something called post-traumatic growth. They say that the world is so familiar with PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. When hard things happen, you live with them. It's almost like they imprison you. You're never able to move from there, but they reframe it and talk about post-traumatic growth. They discuss how to respond when someone suffers loss, how to grow, not just in the wake of tragedy, but even before it. The best thing you can do is build routines that may surround yourself, like what we have said, surround yourself with caring, loving communities. Post-traumatic growth. Now, chapter 1 might end and you think Naomi is in a very bad state. In fact, I began the story with thinking that Naomi is so caged to her past. But the story ends with Naomi rejoicing over the birth of her new grandson. And basically, you can tell both of them, they encountered post-traumatic growth. So that's how the story begins. May God help you. What is the dark wood? Who is with you? How can you see God present with you? Let us close our eyes for prayer. As I was reading through the book of Ruth, I couldn't help but imagine how the last 3 years have been defined by loss in so many ways. And I don't know what loss comes up for you top of the mind, right? I don't know whether you're still stuck there. I don't even know whether how you navigated that. Or maybe more importantly, I don't know what loss you may be facing right now, or what suffering, or what struggle. And maybe you've been wrestling hard that this is not true, this is not true, this is not true, this is hard. But we've been invited to just say, you know what? If it's there, it's hard. And in the midst of it, to awaken our caring, concern, and commitment and devotion for each other. And to also remember we may not see God, but He's acting in that moment. Our loving God, I don't know what losses come to our minds right now. Maybe some of them we may have forgotten them and we are beginning to remember them. Maybe some of them are still so fresh in our minds and in our hearts, and we can actually so resonate with Naomi when she says, don't call me pleasant, call me bitter, because God has emptied me and dealt me a bitter card. Wherever we are, God, teach us to navigate that with you. Teach us to find healing. Bring people around us who love, who support, who understand and walk with us. And also help us be those people for one another who see a friend going through it and awaken our care, concern, commitment, and devotion for one another. Help us, God. You're the one who says that, come to me, you who are weary and heavy burdened, and you will give us rest. And we will find rest for our souls, for your yoke is easy and your burden is light. Walk with us. Walk with us. We bring our burdens to you, our losses, our sufferings, to you who loves and carries us and sustains us. In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit we pray.